Welcome to the Complaints Commission. I'd like to say a special good morning to the members of the media that are here. Thank you once again for coming to the Complaints Commission and giving us your kind coverage. We appreciate your presence. My name is Monique Hodge-Bell, the Assistant Complaints Commissioner, here for 6 years now. The next voice that you will hear, without further ado, is the voice of the current Complaints Commissioner and Ombudsman, Mr. Elton Georges, CMG, OBE. He will be followed by the incoming Complaints Commissioner, Ombudsman, Mrs. Sheila Brathwaite.
I really appreciate your being here, and we won't keep you long. I'm sure some of you are saying to yourselves, is this really it? Is he really going this time? Well, I am really going this time. We have a new commissioner in the House. None of you would have been around except for Mrs. Brathwaite, but in 1974, when Richard Nixon was leaving the White House, and he famously said to the press corps at the White House, "You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore." Well, I can't honestly say this to you, ladies and gentlemen of the press. Not at all. That's not my experience. Although I might say, if some were here, to some representatives of the people, you won't have Georges to ignore anymore. On an occasion such like this, which is a changing of the guard, I think that a brief look back at the history of this institution, this office, is in order, as it happened in the BVI. The BVI could not escape the tide of good governance that was sweeping the world, sweeping the Commonwealth, certainly, in the latter part of the last century. And I date the beginning of this institution in the BVI in 1984, when the then Chief Minister, the late Mr. Cyril Romney, proposed to establish an Office of Ombudsman to deal with complaints against the bureaucracy. It did not happen on that occasion, but in 1994, the Constitutional Commission that had gone around the territory in 1973 reported widespread support for the establishment of such an office of what they called Ombudsman or Complaints Commissioner. And so they firmly recommended in their 1994 report that it should be established. 6 years later, the constitutional amendment of 2000 came from London, and it included that innovation of the Complaints Commissioner, along with another good governance innovation, the Register of Interests. I must pause here to say that sadly the Register of Interests remains sort of a dead letter, because although there's a registrar, no register has been established because of the failure of the House of Assembly over these years to appoint a committee that the law says should establish the form of the register. And in any case, the law that in 2006 that brought the register into being, but should have brought the register into being, does not be activated as a good governance feature. But this institution went on in 2003, 3 years after the constitutional amendment. The Legislative Council passed the Complaints Commissioner Act, and so we were set to be in business. Now, I was head of a selection panel as deputy governor in 2003 that was convened to sift the applications for the position, that responses to the advertisement. And when I retired in December 2003 from that office, I remember we left a recommendation with the then governor for the appointment of one of the applicants, the late Dr. Pearl Valack, to be the first Complaints Commissioner, Ombudsman. The system could not apparently agree, so that appointment was, for some reason, not made. But I sometimes smile when I think of how some of the public officers, senior officers, or others feel that I was being hard on them. I sometimes smile to think what they might have done with Dr. Pearl Valack, if any of you knew her. Dr. Valack was, a very no-nonsense lady. And she had those eyes that sometimes look at you, they look right to you, as if she's looking into the part where you keep your integrity and you feel yourself judged. I'm sure I don't have that quality that she had, but it would have been interesting if she had been in fact appointed. So indecision continued about the appointment until 2009, when then it was still open, and I had the good fortune to be appointed called on by the governor to fill this office. On taking office, and forgive me for being so personal all the time, but this is what happened. I did say to Governor Perry that I would do it for 3 years, set it up, and move out to allow a younger and more vigorous person to take over. In 2012, when that 3 years was up, I voluntarily asked to extend it to 2 more years, 5 years, because I wasn't satisfied that the foundation had been really set. And so that came to an end in 2014, and in 2013, the search for a successor began, and the system, after long labor, I think, with a lot of contractions and stops and so on, the system finally produced a successor. And Mrs. Bassett, who's here with us and from whom you will hear shortly. Now, you, ladies and gentlemen of the press, are very familiar with what we do here. We investigate. It's what you do too, I think. We probe, we try to establish what happened. We ask what are sometimes inconvenient or uncomfortable questions. We state inconvenient truths. Inconvenient truths. We've had to point out fairly often that government agencies, government officials, or government ministers should comply with their own laws, with the laws that the Legislative Council, the House of Assembly have passed. From what I have seen, I think I've said this before, it is fortunate for the government that few people in the BVI are aware of what's called judicial review, where you ask the court to review government actions. Or, if they are aware of it, few people are willing to use it, or able to use it, and to go to court to challenge official acts. Because in too many cases, we just don't follow the law. As an example, you'll remember a case some years ago when, and this was a complaint, a person was being charged stamp duty, not in accordance with the law, but in accordance with what the officials thought the law should be. And they had good reason for thinking so. It just so happened that that was not the law. We've also made recommendations for the government to keep the public informed on matters that concern them. For example, a person applies for a business license and is told months later that he or she did not meet the criteria for approval of the license, but they were not told what the criteria were. Well, we at this office says, please publish the criteria for everybody to see. If there are legally imposed restrictions on which licenses, who can get, publish those restrictions ahead of time. Too often we see that people have to go through the process of applying, wait for a decision, then learn, well, you wasted your time because you will not be approved for this type of license because you are not eligible, but you didn't know. And so these are the things, these are the kinds of things that we have to keep hammering away at, that the people are entitled to. I'd like to spend a few moments speaking about the role of the press, which you ladies and gentlemen, I think only ladies today, are representative. The press is the other medium other than the Complaints Commission for independent investigation and independent, I hope, publication of what may sometimes be inconvenient truths. I would say without hesitation that the press has, for the most part, over the 6 years that I have been here, been a very helpful element in amplifying the voice of the Complaints Commission and amplifying the messages that we have been trying to send out. I am sure that you will continue that role in the future, because that is what you do. And I hope that you will continue to push the key messages that persons have a right to receive from their government officials good service, a right to fair and courteous treatment, to timely responses to inquiries, to respect for their human rights and their dignity. People also, of course, have corresponding responsibilities to obey the law, to behave in reasonable ways when they're in contact with government offices, try to follow instructions, and so on. You should also say that a message that we have tried to put out is that justified complaining is a civic responsibility. When the kind of treatment that you have a right to expect has failed and it's justified, we believe that it's a public service that to complain and have it looked into, and because it could lead to improvement for many others down the line. And my staff can tell you we're really thrilled when we do have complainants who say, I know that not much can be done in my case, but I wouldn't like to see anyone else experience what I experienced. If I may sum up then with a quotation from an observer, an academic, who, in looking back, this was years ago, on the history of the Ombudsman institution in the Caribbean, said the following: few will disagree that the Ombudsman can achieve minor successes and trivial victories, but the substantial challenges of administration have yet to be faced. Ultimately, whether the Ombudsman can be an effective watchdog for citizens' rights depends not only on the powers and character of the office holder, or on the willingness of Parliament, in our case the House of Assembly, to make the office work, but also on the willingness of the executive, your cabinet, your public office, civil servants, and the wider public sector, and indeed on the willingness of society to let the office flourish. And I might add to that that the press is the most influential part of that civic society that this author is pointing to as having a role in being willing to let the office of Ombudsman Complaints Commissioner flourish. I can't leave without saying again, I have to say, how wonderful my co-workers Monique and Beverly, Mrs. Beverly Sargent, Mrs. Monique Hodge-Bell, have been, and how much of any success that has been achieved in this office over the past 6 years is due to their really dedicated, hard work. To them both, I have to say a very heartfelt thank you. And I wish them the very best as they continue in this great public service. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce the Complaints Commissioner as of 1 second past midnight tonight. And that'll be Mrs. Sheila Brathwaite. Now, Mrs. Brathwaite and I go back a long way. School. She was in a class in school back in the 1960s that I taught, and she had the temerity the other day to agree with me when I said I was a terrible teacher. She did agree. She said, yes, you were. And then in the public service, we have been in the public service together for a lot of her time in the public service. I was there. And so I know her very well from those encounters. Over the past month, we have spent quite some time together, first in Curacao at the Caribbean Ombudsman Conference there, and the anti-corruption training sponsored by the International Ombudsman Institute, and that was in late May, in the last week in May. And then here in this office where she has been for most of this month, observing, taking part, while I've been able to be handing over gradually to her. And I really believe that she's beginning to catch the flame, as they say. And she's gearing up to do battle with the forces of maladministration in the public sector, to speak truth to power, to bear witness, all of those good things. But let her speak for herself. Please welcome the Complaints Commissioner, Mrs. Bratt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Georges. Good morning, everyone. Members of my staff, GIS officers, members of the press, and Mr. Georges, good morning. Mr. Georges has given you some of the history of the office, so I really wouldn't need to do that. Thank you. It is with humility, some delight, and some caution that I approach this new position of Complaints Commissioner for the Virgin Islands. Humility, because I thank God, His Excellency the Governor, the Premier, and the former leader of the opposition for reposing their trust in me to carry out this task. Delight, because I will be able to use my years of experience in the public service to assist public servants in utilizing the tools of administrative procedure and the laws of the Virgin Islands to properly and adequately serve the public as well as improve their own performance. Caution, because it is a significant challenge which requires a very good balancing act of offering advice, getting resolutions, and dispelling fears of attack on the public service. In seeking to calm fears which public servants may have, I assure you that the Office of the Complaints Commissioner has as its core values confidentiality, fairness, independence, and persistence for the common good. The office is not the enemy. In fact, the office is your ally. We are here to assist you. The public, too, needs to know that we are not biased and will address your complaints in a fair and confidential manner with the aim of finding a resolution. Our main role is to accept complaints where warranted, carry out thorough investigations, and make recommendations that would bring the public service even closer to being a world-class organization while simultaneously having satisfied customers. Woodrow Wilson once said, "The firm basis of government is justice, not pity." The Office of the Complaints Commissioner seeks justice for the complainant as well as the public service. My request of public servants is that they try as much as is possible to instill in their work ethic the Nolan principles which Governor Duncan reminded you of recently, and which I reiterate are of high importance in carrying out your daily duties. These core values are selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. In addition, sharing your knowledge with other officers helps to foster growth and development in the service. And publicizing, as Mr. Georges just said, your policies and procedures helps to guide the general public. I also look forward to working with you, the members of the press, to get our message out to the general public. I end with two quotations. First, Sir Winston Churchill said, "If the human race wishes to have a prolonged and indefinite period of material prosperity, they have only got to behave in a peaceful and helpful way toward one another." I paraphrase that quotation to say, if the government of the Virgin Islands wishes to have a prolonged and indefinite period of administrative prosperity, public servants and complainants have only got to behave in a respectful and helpful way toward one another. My second quotation, President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "Though force can protect in emergency, only justice, fairness, consideration, and cooperation can finally lead men to the dawn of eternal peace." Our office hopes to help reduce conflicts between the public service and the public, thereby diminishing maladministration in the public service. I thank you.
Well, thank you all one more time for being here today and covering this very special session at the Complaints Commission. We look forward to having you once again. Thank you very much.